Alright everyone, it's time for Occult Literature, video number 243, Occult Japan. It's a study about Shintoism, actually, largely, not entirely. There are reasons that this particular work is interesting, and you should definitely read it, that go beyond its coverage of actual Japanese traditional religion. Link in the description of my edition of this work on Amazon. The second and third links are to my books blogs. This one goes under the religion and spirituality header, definitely, for its study, although it is technically an academic work. It's over 200 pages. I think it's like 208 or something. It is full length. By the way, no shit, I think the initial edition that I was working from was in the upper 300s range. That's what happens around this particular era, 1880s to 1920s especially. They tended to double space everything. It's a very, very good work. Now, a lot of it is on the idea of God possession, the rituals, the prayers, the incantations, and so forth that are involved in the Shinto belief system in its various subforms, to try to get like intercessory or possessive spirits to come into individuals for various reasons. It goes a little bit into sort of the folk incantation side of things, but I think perhaps the most interesting is the fact that this was written in the 1890s by Percival Lowell, no less. And if you know anything about the history of astronomy, you may know him as the dude who convinced people that there were canals up on Mars. But actually, in his own personal studies, he appears to have been much more interested in Asian religion than anything else. He wrote, I think, 3 or 4 different works on those subjects. Meanwhile, he was also like looking at the sky on a constant basis. So he's definitely a Renaissance man. Definitely interested in spirituality and sort of the paranormal, it seems, among other things. Rumored Planet X, looked for Pluto, didn't find it, I believe, although later on one of his astronomical laboratories did. Interesting times. Anyway, it's most notable for its time period, because what was happening in Japan at the end of the 1800s, they were halfway through the Meiji period, and I may be mispronouncing that slightly, I apologize. Now, specifically a period of rapid advancement and industrialization. Over the course of not that many decades, Japan went from feudal, technologically extremely isolated, really not that different from how it had been in the 1600s, to an emergent superpower, an emergent great power, force within the world with a significant industrial presence, especially in the naval sense, increasingly, towards the World War I period, really where it's already emerged as a developed nation, more or less. At least within its urban centers, it had fully industrialized by that time. Life, outside of that, of course, a little bit less so. Therefore, the spiritual systems around this time were rapidly changing too, but not the central spiritual system. Shinto stayed exactly the same, and this is even alluded to within the work. Shinto remains the same. You've got, an incalculable number of deities for various purposes and all these backstories, the very elaborate mythologies involved with the creation of Japan, the islands there, resulting from divine sexuality, actually, among other things, and the formation of the world. That's all the same, but the expression, the way in which the folkish tradition warped over time. For instance, even the changing, initially, those little colored sashes that are placed on poles outside of certain dwelling houses, especially places like taverns and hotels, I believe specifically, or as decoration in a spiritual context, over time go from cotton, in the earlier period to silk, as silk becomes more influential in Western markets, I believe specifically, and then to paper. Well, it's cheaper. It's a lot easier. It becomes more urban, more modern, as you would term it. Less reverential in a way. Much more inexpensive for people who didn't have a lot of expenses to give. And it talks about the different sort of, you could argue, priestly figures. It starts off with a meandering anecdote about specifically the author and his team following a group of Japanese individuals, monks after a fashion, up the sacred mountain and so forth, and the various rituals that they involve themselves in. Very, very good work. Very interesting. Of course, a little bit of ethnocentrism in it, because you got late 1800s, you've got this American dude, this American intellectual, professional, sitting in Japan. They're halfway through their industrial transformation. In the most literal sense, he's a little bit ethnocentric, talking about some of these various rites. But there's an appreciation for it that renders it a lot less so than a lot of contemporary works. A lot of the works from this particular period deride the subject. Going to some tribe in Cambodia or something, 1875. They're like, oh well, these primitive people here, and here's the weird shit that they do. And here's how it badly compares with Christendom. Lowell doesn't do that. He doesn't do any comparison. He's just straight reporting. He's still obviously into the proto-eugenic sort of thought, but he doesn't appear to have been particularly. He didn't look down on the subjects that he was talking about. A very interesting book. Highly recommended. Again, link in the description of my edition of this work on Amazon. Second and third links to my books blogs. There are other works on various religious forces, a lot about theosophy and sort of the spiritualist movement as well on my blogs there. That's about all. Peace out.